Very happy to welcome Charlie Apicella to the podcast today. Charlie's a killer guitarist, and he's really done it all. He from studying with legends like Pat Martino and Yusef Lateef, and also been able to perform with people like Dave Holland and Sonny Fortune. Been in a lot of different places in the jazz world. His projects span from classic blues to more cutting edge type stuff. And also, he's an artist for Eastman and Guild guitars, which is pretty cool. He teaches with True Fire, and he definitely has some serious insights. So, Charlie, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Charlie, let's talk about Blues Alive. I know you're the program director for it, so kind of give me a little bit of the Reader's Digest versions for being the program director for that.
Thank you. Blues Alive is an education organization where we essentially what we're doing is we're teaching workshops in the community. We're teaching assemblies and workshops in schools, public schools. I have some private school clients as well. I'm a consultant and a teaching artist for Newport Jazz Festival. And then we also do have finally started to do some event production in the sense that we're planning and curating days at like festivals too. So I can tell you something about that.
So yeah, you mentioned that you're going into public schools and giving assemblies, which is how's the response been for that thus far?
It's incredible. I mean, you can see some videos on the website. It's bluesalivanyc.com.
Hmm.
So we do everything up to, like 456 graders. We go to all five boroughs in New York City. We have just received grants to take the program out of New York City public schools and start working with New Jersey school districts. And that's through my work with North Jersey Blues Society. I'm the vice president of education for them. And I just found out a couple days ago, in fact, that the president of the Blues Foundation in Memphis, blues.org, is recommending me to be on their education committee as well. So I'm going to be an education board member for them.
So
Uh,
it sounds to me like music education is something that is vital in your, approach to being an artist. So how did it get started when you first did your first assembly for, like you said, you were working with like hundreds of people in one room, right?
well, it's not music ed.
Hmm.
We are social studies teachers who happen to be musicians,
Oh, okay, okay. So
right? So my background is actually African American studies. When I went to UMass, I was not a musician. I was just beginning on guitar, and I was so interested in music that I went into the African American Studies department. So I studied arts administration, Afro-Am, I studied art history. And then towards the end of my time at UMass, I finally got good enough on guitar to actually audition for the ensembles and start to get some music training. Um, so what I do with Blues Alive is there's really three components of it. There's the curriculum, which is the story that we're telling. It's the curriculum that I wrote. It's a massive, I think it's up to 17 full like Google slide presentations, and they're all different. You might want to say they're like different historic times or chapters in American history. So there's Appalachian music, and there's the Harlem Renaissance, and there's the Civil War era. Broad topics. Within those broad topics, I have woven through the story of African American classical music as the focus of this American history story. So it's a massive story that we're offering to our clients. When the institution comes to us and they want to do a program, we can also, our second pillar is we can provide the teaching artists. So that's myself, Myra Casales, the wonderful conga player, Avery Sharpe, one of the greatest living musicians, the wonderful bassist, Juma Sultan, the wonderful percussionist, a very good friend of mine. Um, because what I've been able to do is bring the elder musicians, our griots, into these institutions to interact with. Usually it's like school age students, but we do have finally been receiving grants now to bring the program into community organizations as well.
Oh,
So as the
that's
program
great.
grows and branches out with all these, the ability to get different grants and so forth, then I'm able to, people are coming to me asking me for programs for help to put forward their education goals and their community outreach goals. So we put together a program that suits them for that.
Did you feel that this was something you would be, did you envision doing this type of thing in your career once you started, you know, going in the, guitaristic direction in college, or like, are you surprised where that it ended up at this place?
When I started studying with Pat Martino, the very first thing he ever told me, the minute I walked in, was he said, "This is a utensil." He said, "I used to be obsessed with this, and now I'm not obsessed with it anymore. I do what's required, and then I put it away, just as if you would go in the kitchen and eat with a fork, and then you put it back in the drawer when you're done." What that opened up for me was that it freed me from being focused on what I was exposed to in terms of school jazz training or some sort of jazz pedagogy. And it showed me that the instrument and music is there as to interact with people, right? It's a social music, as Miles Davis would always say. They would ask him, "Is it called jazz?" He would say, "No, it's called social music." So I've been able to put that into practice. And for the longest time, I've been teaching guitar and teaching jazz pedagogy, and I kind of crafted my own curriculum on TrueFire. But it occurred to me that I'm not really interested in that as much as I'm interested in the broader context of why these things are the way they are. So during COVID, there was an opportunity to, I was helping create curriculum for school districts in Connecticut. We were putting together programs online. And then when COVID ended, I was able to take that curriculum idea and craft it in a way that was really like a workshop where you work in person with the students and you bring the elder musicians to the institutions.
It sounds to me that, based upon the, you talk about blues alive with such passion, and also where you started out in college, not being a quote unquote, jazz guitar major or something. It almost seems like where you are in your career now, it's like a hand in a glove, so to speak. You think that's an accurate statement?
Well, I wasn't a musician at all. I had just taken an interest in being a musician and the guitar. I was so enamored by the story and the history of, what I was learning from the professors and the people around me. The first music teacher I ever had was Yusef Lateef.
And that's a
But
pretty heavy teacher to have right from the get-go, right?
it was an amazing, and that's what really set the trajectory for this kind of different perspective on, and that's what I always say. Our mantra is that we are social studies teachers who happen to be musicians. Now, my opinion is that musicians are the best teachers. So, but it's not a music curriculum. It's an African American studies curriculum with music as the through line of the story.
Do you think that this approach is definitely, if you were to, let's say you compare this to quote unquote, sometimes people are just kind of forced into learning gen ed music or taking an instrument in school, like not by choice, they only have a certain selection of things. Do you think if they were given this up front that, that they would probably be much more enthusiastic about it, as opposed to, some kids can be like, it's okay. But it sounds to me like this would be something much more eye-opening for them.
What we're able to do is take, well, I can show you for example here. So I have a special interest in instruments from like the Himalayan region, Nepal and Tibet, and like Buddhist chanting and the singing bowls and stuff like that. So I would take instruments like this into the classroom or into the assembly hall. The thing that is interesting about this is that these are instruments which really contain, they really only make one voice, one sound, right? It's a limited musical application, but it's a broad human application. Where the guitar is a very complicated instrument. There's 6 strings, it's vertical, it's horizontal. In order to conform to Western standards of beauty, you have to be able to play the guitar in a way that's not going to offend the people around you. By taking the innovation that I made was by taking instruments that sound good, but only have a limited musical role. For example, if you were to write something down on guitar, it would be like the entire staff, right? Guitar is very low, it's very high, it's very rhythmic, it's very melodic, right? But a bell that has just a nice tone to it and a full voice of its own would only occupy one place on a musical staff, right? So if you take a bunch of people who are not musicians and you give them a bunch of instruments, you now have an orchestra. In order to unlock their potential to communicate with each other and experience the community, you have to remove yourself from the fact that we have to play a certain song. In other words, you're reducing the dependence on a Western ideals of beauty.
When this is, this is great. I love hearing you talk about this and how passionate you are. Now, as far as when you is this these things that you think about, these early lessons, do you take this, are you thinking about these, consciously before you go out and perform, or is that, is it almost like two separate people in a sense? Or
Not separate. The whole idea is that we take what we do on stage, describe it in a classroom, in a community setting. So in other words, there's the band Iron City and then there's Blues Alive. It's all the same people and all the same stuff. The only thing that's different is who is the client. Is the client Blue Note? In which case we're going to do all the same stuff, just filter it so it makes sense to Blue Note. Or is it an assembly for 650 students in Staten Island? For 450 sixth grade students in the Bronx, right? Because our core message is the same, because we're not either way, if you're on stage performing tunes or if you're in an assembly hall interacting with student collaborators, you're still trying to have a human connection with them. So that's the same. The message is the same. When you're working with Juma Sultan, when you're working with Myra Casales, Avery Sharpe, Daniel Carter, William Parker, Sonny Fortune, there's a core message that these people are focused on in their lives. And you're either illustrating that message, inviting people in on stage as a traditional performance, or you're collaborating them. When we get collaborating with our student collaborators, we are then their accompanists. So ideally, there are environments where we're going to be able to go in and perform and then go out into the audience and invite the audience in to the performance. And that's some of the things that we're developing for later on in the year, some things that I've been invited to do.
no, I mean that's I mean if that sounds incredible. And do you kind of feel that that doing these performances when you're doing an assembly for something, are there things that kind of catch you off guard, or then because that's a
Yeah.
doing something for at the Blue Note, or for instance, is much different than an assembly. Does it ever get caught off guard in those moments, or you just kind of you're delivering your message and that's what you hope to do?
The You're turning people into musicians who have never been invited to be musicians before.
Hmm.
So you're inviting them into something that they innately have, that they have never been. Some people, I've heard the term safe space. The safe space is the fact that Avery Sharpe is now accompanying you, even though you sound not good. Well, why do you sound not good? Because you're not a trained musician. But you don't need to be a trained musician in order to sound good in this large ensemble setting. If you go on the website, you'll see interactions with us with school age students. So it'll make sense what I'm telling you, because you'll see the students are invited up to the front of the stage and we are accompanying them.
Yeah, that's and you talked about, something about all of us are musicians. I once heard Pat Martino say in an interview, all of us are rhythmically profound.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you want to talk about Pat for a second, or?
Oh, no, I mean it's up to you. I when you talked about that, all of us are musicians,
Yeah.
and then I know you study with Pat. I remember he said something like that in
Yeah.
interviews. So did that, and you talked about how he said that things are the guitar is a utensil. And
So, yeah, little of what. So I have about 10 hours of tapes from the lessons
oh,
that
you
I need.
recorded them all.
He let me record, believe it or not. Yeah. So, um, I'm gonna, I have to raise the money and have the time to go in there and curate that and try to turn it into like a 1 hour thing. I've been in I'm kind of in the, I'm his manager was one of my mentors, and so we've had conversations about the scope of what this is going to be eventually. But basically, I want to curate. I want other people to be able to hear it. But it's only been recently I've even been able to go back and listen to this stuff. It's recordings of my Zoom recorder sitting there in his, music studio in his room in his house. So it's very emotional to have to listen to this stuff. Um, but little of what we would talk about was guitar. That would only come at the end when he would be like, or sometimes he would, when I would start, he would say, what can I help you with? But it was mostly about different ways to look at the world. I don't know. It's hard to describe it. A lot of it was based in, we had a shared, like this, like Eastern philosophy. This is Taoist thought. He was into, there were some books that we had both read. Most of what we talked about was ways to kind of funnel music making through a philosophical. I don't like to use the word spiritual,
Well,
but
spiritual can be interpreted in a variety of ways, I think, right?
I just don't. I don't know. That word doesn't mean anything to me. I don't have any connection to that word, but it's a word that if I say that, people get an idea of John Coltrane and and they get an idea of a more open world, right? Um, that's what Pat was interested in. The reason Pat was interested in me and we had a friendship was that I wasn't asking him about his picking hand. You know what I mean? I wasn't asking him about things that were grounded in the physical plane. I don't know how to.
No,
It's pretty
I
weird.
understand. I know some people who have
Yeah.
gotten to take lessons with him, and they definitely talked about it. This was not your average guitar lesson with, and okay, you need to learn this, and you need to learn that, and you need to learn this.
No.
Was he, it sounds like he was sort of a mentor to you, and that, you have, you studied
Yeah. Of
with
course.
him for a while. Do you think that he's been someone in the back of your mind all the time, and he's sort of the one who got you to open your eyes a little bit to the bigger picture of things?
When the reason, obviously, I got unique insights from him. Studying with Pat and getting up to that level that I imagined was his expectation for my facility on guitar. That's how I got good. Is that I took what Dave Stryker originally taught. I never studied like in school or anything. I studied with Dave and then I studied with Pat, and that's been it. Right. And I just did it all, filled it in just by practicing.
Yeah.
I'm studying guitar, right? And like jazz improvisation. So Dave was the foundation. That's everything. That's the broadest sense of a concept of what I had of what is expected of you to be a guitarist, a, a jazz guitarist. I'm only interested in African American classical music, right? I have no interest in anything like what wedding bands do and cover bands and pop music. I don't know any of that stuff. I don't know about it. I haven't been playing music long enough to have even focused on that yet, right? So I basically knew what I wanted to do, and I've only ever worked on just that.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, it takes a certain amount of self-awareness, and then when you talk about, I've never done a wedding band, this other stuff. I mean, to me, some doing those sorts of things can almost feel like any other job, and
I
that.
couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I'm not. I don't. Guitar is not easy enough for me to do that. I would have to devote. I wouldn't want to play a style of music that I don't love because it takes so much effort for me to learn anything.
Mhm.
You know what
I,
I mean?
I,
That
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I
I'm
think
not one
that.
of these. I was never like all the guys I work with. I can't even comprehend how talented they are. My drummer friend Austin Walker, Brad Whiteley, who plays keyboards with me, Gordon Kuba, another drummer that I play with. These guys were trained how to execute like the craft of music. I
Yeah, no,
don't.
Gordon, that's how, Gordon, that's how I, got exposed to your music was through Gordon. Gordon's one of my good friends. So it's the world's small in that way.
Yeah, but they have a skill set that's completely different than mine. I couldn't go just sub on a wedding band or whatever, like or whatever these guys do, where they do sub on other people's bands. I can only do my own thing, right? Um, and told me, Pat encouraged me in that route, but it's just what my skill set is, right? I'm so individual, and the amount of effort it takes for me to get to a point where I can make this into a job is a lot of that type of effort. So
Yeah,
there's
I also wanted to ask you too, because, jazz has, a lot of deep roots and the blues, and it's also open to constant change, so to speak. Um, Would you say that, when you're doing these programs and educating, do you feel like you're creating something new, or you're just still continuing the story?
I try to be in a position where every single time I play the guitar, it's the exact same song as it was 5 years ago.
Okay.
This is a concept that I'm developing with one of my best friends, and my closest collaborator now is Daniel Carter.
Hmm.
We have a band, Juma, Daniel, and I started a band called the Griots Speak. So my last two records on Origin are this band, and it's spontaneous improvisation. Sometimes people call it free jazz, but it's not interstellar space. It's not John Coltrane flavored free jazz. It's free jazz in the sense that if you were to be walking past, my record player, and you would hear Tibetan singing bowls, it's free jazz like that. So we use the blues alive instruments, the blues alive voices, with bass, with organ, with drums, with saxophone. But the mentality, it's ambient meditation music.
Yeah, I mean, this is so fascinating to me. I mean, I'm someone who's been meditating for, for at least a decade or so, and I'm not as diligent as I should be about it sometimes, but there is something about, that music is a meditation, unquestionably. And music does, and meditation creates a safe space. Um, do you think that, and I noticed you said the word safe space, so I just wanted to ask you, do you think about that when you're doing this, it is, putting people in that safe space, in a place to, become more reflective or more relaxed? Do those thoughts ever occur to you?
The Again, Pat was a great demonstration. The amount of concentration. When I first started with Pat, I was having a lot of trouble just concentrating.
Hmm.
I would be at a gig, probably always worried that I stunk and that I was going to get fired, right? General anxieties that you have when you're young and doing the New York thing, you know? But when you're in Pat's presence, just like the concentration that you would see from this older man, you know what I mean? He was smaller than me, he was shorter than
Well,
me,
yeah, he was my favorite. I mean, unquestionably. So,
but the amount of energy and power and focus and concentration, he was like, an ultra supernova, whatever, just boiled down to like the least assuming physical presence.
yeah, I've always thought of Pat as like the John Coltrane of guitar, if that makes sense.
Well, in some ways, and yeah, sure. There's a lot of parallels in there. He was influenced by Coltrane, absolutely. But what you asked me a minute ago is what did Pat tell me? What did I kind of learn from Pat in a broad sense? What freed me up was that a lot of stuff. Obviously, there was a lot of. Pat was the bridge between Yusef Lateef and Dave Stryker and Pat for me, right? So a lot of the technical stuff that Dave taught me and a lot of the esoteric stuff that I learned, Yusef didn't really teach much of anything. He made suggestions, and then you just sit back and try to remember as much as possible about just him being there, right? When I got with Pat was reinforcing both things simultaneously. So everything that I thought was so strange and exciting about Yusef was amplified being with Pat. They kind of spoke the same way. They kind of had similar interests in a lot of ways. There was an openness and a really sweet nature, and they were so much fun to be around. So the thing that was so interesting about Pat was that it made all of the stuff that was kind of in shadows in my mind about my time with Yusef perfectly well formed. It was like reinforcing all of this stuff. They were the same generation. They hung out with a lot of the same people. I mean, Yusef was much older, but they were, you know what I mean? They were much older than me, even, and then all the other unique stuff that I got from Pat. But the thing that was so freeing about it was that it was reinforcing a lot of the new broad ideas that I picked up from Yusef. Once I became comfortable with that, because the one thing that I always was able to articulate about my time with Yusef was that he was focused on everybody being an individual. He was focused on your individual contribution. Once I had that reinforced by Pat, right? Once it wasn't just a singular idea floating out on its own, it was magnetized now to these ideas that Pat gave me. I was able to say, oh, all of the student collaborators, all of our collaborators with us have that exact same thing. If you take one instrument that makes one voice, it will amplify their entire voice,
Yeah,
right?
the individuality that you're talking about is something I think is definitely overlooked.
It's overlooked for a number of reasons. Some of them are socio-political, which I have a bit of a vocabulary because of my African American studies background. So the way that I'm able to interact with and have conversations with and contribute to the conversations that Daniel Carter has, Aisha Lateef, Yusef's wife, Juma Sultan, Sonny Fortune, and even people who are their sidemen, so Steve Johns and Avery Sharpe, people who are younger than them, is my background in African American studies. So there's a lot of the trick is to create a curriculum and create a story that re-examines some of the ways that we do things in institutions, in history, in social studies, in music pedagogy, in jazz world, to re-examine those things that we take for granted, but do it in a way that invites people instead of indicts them.
No, I love it. I love it.
I If
It's
I think they're wrong, I need to take the extra effort not to get all Italian about it and
no,
confrontational.
I understand. Well, no, Charlie, I can't thank you enough for speaking with me today. And so where can everyone find you as far as, websites and social media? Can you want to just plug that real quick?
Yep, bluesalivenyc.com. I'm curating part of the Yusef Lateef Symposium at Vanderbilt University. in September. They're bringing myself, Avery, Steve Johns, Aisha Lateef, Alexis Marcello. We're going to teach Yusef's curriculum. We're going to have a panel. We're going to have a big concert. I'm curating a day at the Brooklyn Folk Festival in November. That's going to be a Ma Rainey celebration. That's going to begin in February. This is going to be a Ma Rainey year. 2025 is going to be a centennial of my Ma Rainey research and work. We have Lewis Porter is the panel moderator. We have a vocalist named Baritha Reddy. Again, Avery, Steve Johns. We're the band. Myself. So we're going to reframe Ma Rainey as a great American composer and her work as a living tradition of blues. We're going to start with an MLK celebration, February 7th and 8th. We're going to be at SOPAC on the 7th. We're going to be at Jalopy, which is part of Brooklyn Folk Festival, February 8th. And then we're going to do the big thing in November. I'm bringing up from Georgia, the Ma Rainey Museum, a woman named Florine Dawkins, who's the curator of the Ma Rainey Museum. We're going to present her with a Lifetime Achievement Award. So things are mushrooming. We have we're really addressing these conversations from a lot of different perspectives.
No, a lot to look forward to. And, 2025 is going to be a good year. Absolutely.
Thank you.